And we're live. Welcome, everybody. Hi, Chris. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And Catherine, hi.
Hello.
Hello, hello. How are you
Stoked to be
guys
back.
doing? Yeah, February, right? How's the winter going on your side?
Man, we had an ice storm that was insane. Like we didn't leave our house for over a week. There was just inches of ice on everything. And then,
Wow.
now it's 50 degrees and beautiful. So
Okay, well, take that. How about you, Catherine? How is it going for you?
San Francisco winters are a mix of surprisingly sunny days and then days like today where it's just pouring outside. So it's one of those days.
I see. Cool. Well, hope that everybody's getting, a little bit warmer weather soon. Today, I'm very excited to have like our guest today, Jennie. Jennie Yip. Hi. I'm gonna put you
Hi.
on top so we can see you better. Uh, Hi, Jennie. So Jennie is a design architect, especially, I guessing, well, I will not be able to say that word, so I'm going to change. But you're in charge of the Atlassian design system as the design architect for that team. We're super excited to have you with us today. So, hi, how are you doing?
Good. It's very, like Catherine said, very rainy and gloomy here in South
Yeah,
Bay.
you're in California too, right? Like Silicon
Yep,
Valley.
South Bay. Mm-hmm.
Cool, great. South Bay represent. I used to be there with you, so I'm.
Yeah.
It's dear to
I'm
my
at
heart for sure.
the Atlassian office in Mountain View today. Yeah.
Oh,
Nice.
cool, nice. There's not a whole lot of people behind you, so I don't know if people work from
This
mostly
is
from home.
the open kind of co-working, like open space, which is really nice. So I don't know if
Oh,
you can
cool.
kind of see,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's really nice. And then
Oh,
there's a
wow.
bunch of desks over there.
Got it. Cool. Well, usually we start our conversation by talking about things that happened since last time we talked, so roughly a month ago. So we have like cool stuff that we wanted to show and talk about today. Catherine, you're gonna, start that conversation with a very cool tool.
Yeah. So last year I was lucky to angel invest in this startup called Galileo AI, and basically what they're doing is building a AI to generate design work, UI design, particularly for mobile and web. And so they just had the public launch yesterday, so everyone can go try it. Actually, generate some designs, and I think it's just big step, I think, in having AI be a part of the design process for UI and product designers. And so I think it's definitely a very intriguing tool that helps lower the barrier of entry to people being able to do design, and also can be a partner for more seasoned designers to do design work in a way that they're not touching every pixel, which I think is a path that we're going to be going down over the next few years, particularly as these AI tools really develop. So I know you got a chance to play around with it. Do you have anything that you wanted to share?
Yeah. So, just for kicks, I tried a prompt, design a landing page for a live stream podcast called Design System Field Guide, where you can access the playlist of all the previous episodes and know about the next one. So that's the answer that I got. What I think is interesting is that, first of all, it assumes a mobile application. So, it's I think it's interesting how, like it's not web as the default. And then, yeah, I mean, like this is pretty cool. And one thing that I saw is that you can actually like go for like dark mode and change the color and like having some ways to tweak, to quickly tweak those things. So yeah, it's pretty cool for me. Like it's pretty cool to have like maybe a first idea of how things could look. Um, I guess also my first reaction is like, I wonder if you can just like plug in your design system behind it, so it just use your components and not just put stuff on the fly. But yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I definitely think that's something that's on the team's radar, and I do think there's a lot of competitors, like the ones that I've spoken about before, like Magic Patterns and V0, that are thinking about how to integrate your own design system and also not just generate designs, but then go straight to code. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in this particular space.
It's really neat that it doesn't have to regenerate the assets to shift attributes about it. Like, that's really nice. One of the hardest things about using AI tools to do generative design work is that the regeneration time, even if it preserves context, is oftentimes like a huge barrier for me because it takes out of flow. And so the ability to say, like, it's the same set of assets, but I'm applying different coloring or different border radiuses to it. That's a great little nicety there.
Yeah. Jennie, have you ever tried tools like that? What are your thoughts right now about those things?
I haven't yet, but I'm kind of curious to see like what you guys just mentioned, like if we could insert our design system behind it for them to kind of generate it quickly, quick ideation. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah.
Right. And this is just Figma right now, right? So like there's can you access code behind this, or is it Figma for right now?
It's just Figma for right now. But there are very similar tools that do both Figma and decode.
I always love to look at the code output of these, right? Because
Mhm.
it's one of those situations where it's like, this is where the design system insertion into the process is so essential, because if you're using components that actually have really strongly well-crafted code behind it, that's super valuable. If it's doing generative code, like, it's good directional validation, but it's usually not something that you can ship into production. And so like, this is the rub, right? Is like, we all want tools like this that help us create more quickly and easily, but it also has to be stuff that doesn't require a ton of rework to get it into the actual production state.
Yeah. One thing that I just seen, and I don't know, it's like apparently you can upload an image. Have you ever tried that, Catherine?
Yeah, so this is interesting because you can upload not just higher fidelity, like sort of mocks that you've designed yourself, but then also wireframes to kind of get a directional design that then is more polished through this tool. So I think there's different ways that you can utilize this feature, but having both like the textual interface to generate as well as like the image base, I think gives designers more sort of flexibility in figuring out how to like work with this tool to get to that first starting point, as you mentioned.
Yeah, it's great to be able to say, like, here, take this thing that is a first draft or a like bad version, we use that phrase a lot at Knapsack, and try to make it into something more unique and interesting. I think that's cool.
Yeah, I would even argue that I feel like because of, well, maybe like component libraries and stuff like that, I feel like maybe designers are going a little bit too fast into high fidelity mode when actually you see better certain things if you're using wireframes or even a content model, like just to have a clear idea of what needs to be prioritized and stuff like that, rather than having something that looks polished but actually there's it's an eye candy but it has no substance behind it. So I like that. Cool. Anything else, Catherine, on that front, or should we move on to the next thing?
Let's move on.
Okay. So next thing that happened that's pretty big is that Figma put dev mode outside of the beta phase, and it's now a real thing. And I guess, Chris, you wanted to talk about this. Do you have something that particular in mind?
I mostly want to hear what you all think about it, right? Like, I mean, I get what Figma's trying to do here, right? Is that there's this intention of, most designers use Figma now, right? So how do we create another audience into collaborative land? And developers are the obvious target there. I think that it, to me, is interesting in that it still represents like a pretty hard handoff, right? Like, you're clicking a toggle that changes something from one mode to another. And I think that that's an interesting choice because, I personally feel that most of the time you want it to be a little bit more like collaborative and integrated. But Figma is also pretty smart at gauging the market about like what people are actually able to do right now inside of their teams. But I'm kind of curious, like you all are deeper practitioners than I am right now. I just run a company that does design systems. You all work inside of them every day. So like, tell me about what you think about this.
Who wants to
I
go
think
first?
this is a good tool for the world that exists today, in the sense that I think for many designers, many engineers, many companies, particularly at the scale that I think Figma is trying to build this tool for, it is what people have been asking for and what people need. But I do think like we're in this interesting inflection point where the fundamental process, I think, of how designers and engineers and what those roles mean in our industry are able to shift because of some of the tools and some of the new underlying technology that is coming out to lower the barrier of entry to these different activities and these different skills. And I think this tool is like a useful place for the big companies that are ossified and what they're already doing and what the world looks like. But I think this isn't a great tool for those newcomers and those people that are leveraging these newer, more cutting edge tools to do work that kind of blurs the boundaries a bit. So I think it's useful, but maybe not that interesting.
Love the hot take. It's great.
Jenny, do you have
Yeah, I think the annotations just came out, right? Which is really cool to see. I think, I think it's interesting because they are trying to kind of save time in places that designers are wasting time. So that, for example, annotations for all the stuff you need to do all the time over and over. I think that's a good move. And, those are like the tedious things that we really don't want to do at the end of a design, spec everything out. It's also interesting. I think they only offer this to is it a specific tier?
Yeah, it's
right?
like enterprise, I think.
Yeah. And then so, and the other part is like, I kind of find like, for example, more junior designers like coming in and, instead of spending time speccing and everything, they can actually use the developer mode to kind of look and see how things are built, so that it's a little bit less of I hope that they're using it that way. Maybe that's not as intended because it's geared towards developers, but I think designers should also kind of explore it and stuff to see, because I feel like that's super important to understand the medium that they're designing in, because oftentimes they kind of just generate a screen and aren't super interested in the code side, for example. Yeah, so that's a good way, like less of a barrier here, that they can offer that kind of pathway in their workflow.
that's a very interesting point. I didn't think about it this way, but yeah, maybe it helps.
Yeah, I wouldn't
think
say
this-
like I wouldn't say our engineers would like go in here and take this code, but then, if you really need to like check something really quick and see what the specs are for something, but if they're using something from the system, it shouldn't be like a special magic number or snowflake anyway, right? So it shouldn't be taking too much time to spec it or to like check what the spec is. Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting, right? The idea of like production ready CSS that you can just copy and paste. Like it's one of those things that like that in particular has a weird dichotomy to me, right? Because people that buy enterprise subscriptions of Figma have ways of generating CSS that are never going to use a copy paste capability out of Figma. And so I get the idea about like what you said, Jenny, about like, hey, we want to have people be able to understand how this all gets built and how it gets done. But it is fascinating that use production ready CSS via copy paste. I don't know of an enterprise team that would probably do that. I would see that, like what comment Gina just had, right? I would see that as something that like a smaller team or a freelance team would use really frequently, but it is gated behind a tier.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, the other thing that I'm thinking about is that I dig the functionality. I also saw like certain people making comments on Twitter and criticizing this thing of like not being enough or something like that. So it's a first version, but at the same time, like what I've seen so far is that this thing costs, well, if you're an editor seat, it's free. But if you have a dev that just have access like a view mode, then suddenly to have dev mode, it's $25 per seat per month, which
Yep.
is a cost. And in this context that we are, I wonder how many teams can just make like a blank statement of saying, hey, yeah, sure, all of our engineers will have access to dev mode, because, well, that can be pricey. And what's the value exactly? Like, from my understanding is that not every engineer feel like this is actually very something that they feel is very valuable, right? And another thing that I think is interesting from an organization perspective is that typically this is on the design organization budget, like editor seats for Figma. Suddenly, if you want to pay for dev mode, who's paying for it? Is it engineering? Is it design? Is it something else? Like, I feel like maybe there's also here a little problem here for like who can justify that extra cost, and who exactly is taking is footing the bill, right? And so for now, I don't know, I don't see in the future, but right now, like, this is one of the things I'm like, I wonder how this is going to be land on like those different teams, and is a lot of people are just going to pay for it for everybody. So obviously we were talking, like a small scale, like as a freelancer, but also at like maybe bigger organization, this thing is not trivial, right? So I don't know. The other thing that I'm thinking about is, as you mentioned, and as we see in that example right now, like it gives you like a width of 375 pixel. When I see a raw value like that, I'm like, can you just give it more like the token name or something like that? Because for me, like, this is more like what I'm expecting at that level, and not them to know, like, nobody needs to know, apart from maybe like the engineers that are building the component for the design system, maybe, or something like that. But like, in the end, I feel like this, again, it's the first version, so I'm curious to see how it's going to evolve. But right now it feels a little bit limited for the price that it is.
Yeah, I mean, Figma does a good job of embracing concepts before they really like look at solutions, and so I think that like, I'm hopeful that we see more out of this. Yes, tokens, please, for sure. I mean, like, it is funny, right? Because we still have this idea of, hey, here's a canvas with a bunch of unstructured data. Now, how are we wrapping structure around that data so we can actually use it as code? And I feel like dev mode is not that, certainly. And I think that that's kind of like what a lot of us, especially in the design systems side of things, we're thinking. Oh, okay, that's nice to know.
Thanks, Anna.
And so I think that, like, when it comes to the idea of like, all right, how do you create structured data out of your code? Variables, modes, design tokens, all that stuff is the meaning behind that structure. I think that, like, one of the other interesting kind of parts of this too, and maybe this is a decent segue, Christoph, but the idea about, like, all right, so Figma is obviously trying to say, like, all right, hey, we're at some level of saturation in the designer market. Let's figure out how we include developers in that ecosystem. But there is this other sort of net effect there that I think Dan Mall had a bit on yesterday that was really interesting, where Dan was doing an interview, and in that interview, he was talking about how Figma is actively disincentivized to get people to not use Figma. And I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but the idea is like, the more time that we're spending inside of Figma, the less time we're actually spending building the real product. And I think that that's still the case. We're in this interesting kind of place in the world right now where, we have things like generative AI, which has this promise of, like, let's take something that we make in Figma and make it a website. At least for now and for the foreseeable future, that doesn't really scale into enterprise very well. And so there's this other half of things, which is like, let's take our design systems and our components and make them really, really easy to compose and assemble into experiences. So people that aren't technical can go and build and basically run a design process using coded components. And there is this interesting idea about like, look, you know, when Figma was created, when most design tools were created, there was this pretty hard line where like you needed to have these rapid iteration cycles away from code because code was just frankly too clunky to work with. And now that code is much less clunky to work with and much easier to actually run a design process on, what is the future of design tools? And I think that that's kind of like, I'm maybe putting words into Dan's mouth. So Dan, if you're listening to this, I'm sorry if this wasn't the intent. But what I took away from this was, hey, like, let's question the purpose of design tools and whether or not we should be spending time in those, or we actually spending time assembling and composing our products.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I guess time will tell, but yeah, I agree with you on that one.
I mean, I'm kind of curious. Like, do you all see that too? And like, which side do you come down on? Right? I mean, I sort of have chosen my side with the way that I presented that conversation. But I mean, you know, Catherine, you're working in a generative AI startup. Like, where do you see this happening? And it's probably like some place in the middle, but I tend to be firmly in like camp code.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I see is that code becomes like the underlying foundation that the design tools work in. And so like what exists today as like you are working in a more flexible tool like a Figma, and you're drawing like the sort of sketches of what the product should be, and then you have to like actually go to a different space to build it. I think that gets compressed into one space where the sort of translation layer of what is the kind of like fake directional like idea of the design of the product to the actual creation of the product itself. Those things get that bridge gets less wide, and you're able to like actually do that work in one space and have kind of like a multimodal ability to like, you know, I'm going to work more loosely and then like have the AI do some of this work, but then let me dive in and actually fix the more specific things that I want to do on the layer of abstraction that code allows for. And so I think being like able to, you know, have one underlying like language that, you know, we're working in together, which in my eyes is going to be code, because that is like the right layer of abstraction for like the kinds of products that we end up all building. I think that's where like these tools are going, and AI plus design systems actually is like a way to help like bridge that gap more, so that you can have both of those things in one space.
I don't know. I mean, at the same time, I feel like, you know, there were, I mean, I guess this still exists, but I remember this tool being UX Pin. I don't know if you ever tried it, but
yeah, I used the heck out of UX Pin.
Yeah,
when you had to pay for it with PayPal.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, the point of UX Pin was actually to be a design tool that was relying on code. Like it was, you know, like React component, I think, under the hood or something like that. And I think they're still around, but I didn't see them for a while. But yeah, I mean, and maybe it's also because we all, I think, are more or less hybrids, and, you know, like feel like we can code and we can design, and we wish we would do like both at the same time. So maybe we're not, you know, the target audience of a tool like Figma. But yeah, I don't know. It seems to me that it doesn't get a lot of traction to get there directly. Jenny, do you have a point of view on this?
I mean, code is the source of truth, right?
Agreed.
Yeah. So our team has been thinking a lot about this a little bit. So yes, we agree. Like we use Figma heavily here, right? But we know that we cannot get a design to the final fidelity and that like finesse it in Figma. There's just things that it can't prototype. So we've actually been thinking about building this internal tool that's helping us kind of prototype the path forward. So basically, if we're kind of testing out new designs or something, how do you test everything for the system together without having to push it to a product, right? Or put it behind a feature flag? We are thinking more of like that kind of playground kind of environment where you can kind of like play with the theming, push out new styles, look at it all holistically together. And so when you're actually redesigning like a component or something, like you can get it super far in Figma, but then once you get to the interaction and all the other states, like there's only like things that you can do in code, right? And so like what I really love doing in the past, like when I worked on the system at Udacity, is like we always had a designer and a developer pairing together. And so like we're always like, even if it's just a landing page for marketing, like marketing push, like you have the flat static marketing page, and then like when we're coding it and we're about to go live, we go through a QA together. We're just like, hey, what about this and what about that? And you like add all these things together, and then the outcome is actually much more powerful and impactful than that flat design, right? So interesting, because you know we're trying to get to design and code parity. That's one of our principles as well. Like, but the tools right now can only do so much. So we'll see what all the like open standards and things bring us in the future.
Yeah, I'm curious what you mean with designing code parity, because one of the hardest parts about design tools, broadly speaking, is that they're innately abstractions. There was a post from the 37 Signals hey.com people that talked about the idea about how design tools are innately not the medium that something is destined for. It is broadly speaking an abstraction of reality. And much like how, like, look, I play D&D a lot, so right, like much like how dice rolls are not real life, like Figma is not real code. And so what does parity mean in that context, when you're going to obviously have things that you can do in the web that you will likely never be able to do in your design abstraction?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. So it's not like design equals code, right? One for one. So that's just a principle in a way that we're thinking about for everything that we're applying our work to. So for example, we're gonna to empower developers and designers to promote a more cohesive experience. We've been pushing standards. So for example, coding standards, front-end coding standards now, they're gonna have like linting rules to keep you using the system within the system, right? Within the limits of the system. No more like snowflakes, no more overrides, because we cannot do that at scale. Like there's no way we can like have everything that we need to push if everybody's doing their own thing. And so to kind of put guardrails on that, we're doing these like kind of coding standards and with linting rules, right? And how do you do that in design? It's not really possible to lint stuff in design, right? So our like plugins, we're trying to like only enable like override. So how do I say this? So to enable like a safe way to customize things, you can only customize within the limits of the system, right? So say, for example, we have a button and we're saying, okay, if you really want to customize it, we're only allowing the API to be customized via only the background color and only the border radius, or for example, right? Not open it up to all the CSS properties, right? So we have these kind of like guardrails for these things. And so even in Figma, they're trying to say, we're only going to like allow the background color to be changed. Otherwise this like error or warning pops up or something. So that's kind of like what we've been thinking about. So it's not like what it literally means, where like the code is being as equals to the design, but like that's just it's like a philosophical principle that we're kind of working towards, of things that we apply things to.
It's really interesting, right? It reminds me of when I was a more serious engineer working in the land of ERP systems. Having that idea about like I enter things one place, I enter things one way, one place over here, and they got to match something over here. And so like I used to work with like accounting and production systems, right? And so you'd enter stuff in your production system, then you have to go re-enter it in your accounting system, because like the rules are slightly different between those two systems. And I think that like one of the big promises of the software that I was writing at the time was like we could get rid of that double entry. And like the double entry exists for a reason, right? Like we want to be able to say like this thing over here has an equivalent over here. But the problem is that like there is still a manual process associated with that. Even if there are automatic checking and guardrails, there is still an element of it that is inefficient because of the lack of automation there. And it's an interesting future that I would love to see, that is like hey, some change happens in Figma, and whatever can flow through to code flows through to code. And there's an obvious delta there that is like creates an issue in Git or something like, or sorry, creates an issue in Jira. And then the second side of it is some code change happens, and then that creates some sort of triggered event in Figma that represents a delta there. Because that way, at least, like, when we have these events that are happening where there isn't parity, we're able to identify that gap and make decisions around those gaps instead of have to feel like we're recreating our work all the time.
Yeah. We have another principle called continuous evolution. So what that means is, like, once you adopt a system, if something changes, you're still taken forward and you don't have to like manually kind of change things. So what that means is, like, so say we have all the design tokens and you've used the design tokens. And like when you're starting to like do your system and set up the infrastructure for tokens, and you're like, say, doing the color system, you could be tweaking those color like palettes over and over and over, like nonstop, right? It's like never ever going to be perfect. You'll always find some edge case to change it. And so how do you get your team to like release it at that point in time? And then they're just like, oh no, but we have to tweak it and change all the colors again and push it all out again, and everyone has adopted again, right? But we have a solution that one of our developers created called code mods. Have you guys heard of that before? So code mods, basically, we have a way to take you forward forever. So like it will automate all the changes. So it's like if the token changes from this color to that color, not only will it change like whatever is already touching those UI surfaces, that you can take and this is how we kind of like scale here, because say like there's one-off colors everywhere, you can search for those one-off things and just say we're going to automate it and replace it with that token. So say we rename a token, we can use these code mods to kind of automatically generate that code to say this token name is changing to this token name. So like it just runs through and the developer doesn't have to do a thing.
It's like a recursive find and replace for things that don't.
It's just like, so if you think about applying that principle to other things, we're just trying to like, how can we make life simpler for all these makers so they don't have to manually, and that's why we say like, that's why like one of the value props of adopting, right? We're trying to say like, you adopt once, you get taken forward forever, or as we evolve.
Yeah, I love how principled you are in the way that you talk about systems within Atlassian, like and reflecting on some of our conversations previously. Like, I think that it is interesting that you always kind of relate it back to this core value that's like repeated over and over and over again inside of the systems that you have. And I think that's a really smart way of framing it, because otherwise it's easy to lose sight of things, right? Like I mean, as much as I sort of bashed on Figma for the past 20 minutes, the reality is it has a very important place in our design process. And the principle of the idea of like, hey, how are we continuously adopting these things and taking on the advancements of the system? I love that as a representation of the core of like why you should get on board, even if not everything is perfect. And I think that's something that is often not valued inside of maybe it's not that it's not valued, maybe it's not present in the conversation with design systems teams. Is like, hey, I'm not going to adopt this because it doesn't have the component I want. But if you did adopt it, like once that component's there, look at all the other stuff that you get. I think that's like an interesting conversation to be having in like the design systems arena specifically. Is we find that lots of teams really struggle with that initial onboarding of a new group or a new product or something like that, because they say, oh, this one thing is missing. And that then becomes like the lightning rod for all the problems associated with the design system. And it creates an excuse with which to ignore all the other benefits. And I love that, like, coming back to principles is how you sort of push past that. Does that work pretty well inside of Atlassian?
Atlassian's very big on values. So we have so many different layers of values and principles that kind of ladder into each other. And I've talked about this before in the past. We created and established design system principles a long time ago, a couple of years ago before we did the vision. And that's basically those three strategic pillars that have been guiding us for the past couple of years. It's foundational, harmonious, empowering for everyone. And all those other things that I said that stem from those, like the first horizon is basically like hardening our foundations, redoing all the foundations, modernizing the infrastructure, giving you the building blocks you want to compose things together. And like that's the thing about vision and strategy. Like you can't get people to buy into your vision if they're not a part of it and if they don't believe in what you're aiming towards. So we've always been championing these visions, these principles and stuff, because it helps steer the team in the same direction. So my team is 50 people. I can't get everybody, like in the past, before we had like a vision and before we had values and principles, like everybody wants this, everybody has different opinions, but then once you get everybody in the same room, and I can't believe we were able to do this, but we got 35 people to workshop across, like during remote workshop, and we actually did a workshop for like a couple days and really jammed on together. And that's the whole thing about, like, that's one of the things about systems thinking, right? We're going into this, it's just like that's how you bring people along for the journey. You include them, and then when they feel that their voice has been heard, then they do want to help you bring that vision to life. And so that's how I work with everybody here. It's just like such a huge organization. This is how my team is working, because we have 470, 500 designers. I only have 14 designers. There's no way my 14 designers can multiply their mental models to 500 designers. And I have, maybe 20 engineers, and we have 2,500 front-end engineers here. So that ratio is insane. How do we multiply our thinking to them and help them just work as fast as possible? The only way to do is to keep the team aligned on the same direction. And we've been very steady and very I left for 10 months on leave in the vision and strategy. So I was just like, that's amazing. And they achieved more than I thought they were going to do. It was really in the time that I was gone. So it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I steal your Horizons model frequently, blatantly, because I feel like it is such a great way of framing how you make progress on strategy. And also, like, I love that you talk about how, when you're marching towards like 3 different horizons, you're marching towards all 3 at the same time. It's just a matter of like which one is closest and which one is most in focus. And I think that like if you could describe your model for that, it's been really helpful for me in articulating the way that people should think about adoption and creation of design systems.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. If you think about the 3, I didn't make this up. It's called the 3 horizons of growth, right? But basically, you are working towards all of them at the same time. Our horizon 1 is really about building the foundations, modernizing the infra. So we're basically giving everybody the, design and development infrastructure to modernize the system. Basically, it's like design tokens, primitives, modular building blocks. It's not like, it's like very boring strategy, right, for design systems. Like I just think and that's the thing, I think strategy should be very straightforward and not complicated and not like fuzzy words and shiny things. It has to be like grounded in reality, and I think and this goes back to systems thinking as well. It's just like the way we code and design here in the past is very different, right? Open for all, you can do whatever, use whatever framework. That's why like everything's very inconsistent. We got to fix that. And the hurdle to like re-onboarding everyone. So some people have worked here for like over 10 years, right? And like the system is also 10 years old. So, people who were involved in the first 3 iterations have their way of thinking about how you should be building for systems too. So how do you change their mental models? It's like super interesting. And so Horizon 2 and 3, Horizon 2 is about turning the system into a product. So we've been thinking a lot more about how do we market it like a product. And so you might see our website transform again into more of a product kind of lens. And then the third one is really the second one is also about harmonious and building the right tools for our makers. So basically building the best maker experience, the best experience for our designers and developers to build and code, design and code, and they're in their workflow. Keep them in their workflow, keep them very happy, make it super easy for them to design and code. What can we do? What are the things we can think to give them that like delightful moment of like, I really want to use the system, And then third horizon is the far one, which is systems and systems. This is like the biggest like horizon, the long-term future that everyone's going towards. So we're thinking everybody will build with the system from the ground up. And so how do we get them to we can't do it. Like I mentioned, we have such a small team. How do we scale that to everybody? We have to basically teach everybody to fish, right? So we're not always giving them the fish. And so it's a lot about how to engage with us, how to build local systems, education. We have to like spend time designing courses. We have to design the engagement model. But I think the coolest thing is really the culture aspect. And that's where how you shift culture with systems thinking is like, it's that's why I always say, like, once you have the culture there, the system's going to sell itself. Like in the beginning, it was super hard to sell primitives, like layout, building blocks, modular building blocks. Like people are like, spacing's invisible. How can we sell it? No one will care if they, And I was just like, dude, once they see these primitives, and as a developer, once you get everything there, you don't have to code anything like off. I don't have to code CS anymore. I just put everything together. Right? I see a design, I can break it apart in my head and just put it together. Like that's all I have to do. The other thing, I can go focus on logic more or something, right? And like, but why do you have everybody still pushing pixels? But then it's crazy, right? So it's like once you get them to use it once, they won't stop adopting it. Like, and they just tell everybody else about it. And so that's just how it like proliferates through the culture. And when you are redoing the foundations like we had no spacing system, no type system, or redoing all of them right now, the way to get people to and evolve it together, and that's what I said about the co-creation, people will buy in. It's like you pilot and work with the other product teams, then they feel like they have investment in it. They built it with you. They want to use it, and we have evolved the system to adapt to what they need as well. Then they want to use it. Then they will start telling other teams how to use it. Jira has hundreds of designers. I can't reach out to all of them. You work with a couple of Jira. We made all of Jira dark mode this past summer, which seemed impossible a couple of years ago. But once they all started using it and started understanding this is what tokens are, right? Now we pushed out primitives. They're like, oh, primitives. This is like what primitives are. Like I don't have to write CSS anymore. I can delete all the CSS. Like it's just crazy. Like once they have that aha moment, it's just like exploding. So that's what's happening right now.
I love the idea of the culture change kind of leading the way. I think that's one of the things that like you kind of feel like you've got it when you get other people like selling the system for you inside of the organization. I think that it's fascinating, right? Because you get a bunch of people that like convert from skepticism, right? And I think that it's also how do I put this nicely? People lie to themselves about how much time they actually spend pushing pixels, right? Like, I think that there is this perception that like, oh no, we don't do that anymore. But like the reality is most people still do a lot of that. And once they finally come to grips with how much time they actually are spending, like modifying inline CSS or something like that, like it starts to really show like, oh hey, maybe I wasn't doing all the things that I profess to value in the course of my job.
Jennie, I wanted
go ahead.
No, I found this page and I was wondering if that's the page that you would recommend if people want to see more or learn more about vision, values, and principles. Yeah.
That's I actually helped creative director direct this vision video before I left, which was really fun.
Cool. I'll just put a banner then if people want to see more about it. But I think it's super interesting how you're articulating it. Sorry, you were about to say something.
I don't remember. So let's go on.
That's okay. Cool.
I mean, Catherine, you worked at a place with a big design system at some point. Like, did you feel that same thing where there was a moment where that culture shift happened? I think that maybe it is a little interesting because at DoorDash, like, y'all were a little bit further along in the Born Digital era than Atlassian maybe, but like, did you feel that same vibe?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's interesting for me is that, like, the idea that a lot of design systems work, especially like at scale, but also as you're growing as a company, is about like building community and like champions in that community for this like this tool that's a representation of like how you guys believe products should be built, and it's a tool for getting to that place. I think it was one of those things where for us, we started super early. Like we had a design system from pretty much day one in a lot of ways. And so, the work of getting people on board, building those champions was, still hard but different, because people were coming into an organization trying to get their feet in, being someone at DoorDash, but then also like buying into this idea of how do we build here. And I think, every individual, like it's a process to actually get them to have that belief and work with them to, give them the tools to be successful and to realize like what the impact and, sort of positive, reason to use this thing is. And I think for us, like our big like mantra at DoorDash was that, you're going to have to build the best like tool and the best like system for the for people to use and believe in what we're doing, but then you also actually have to like sit down and work with them and like give them a reason to believe in you as like a person on this team and in us as a team, for it to actually be like truly successful, because you need both like the actual like good artifact, but then also the trust in like why we're using it, and I think that was one of the things that was really important for us.
Yeah, we've had to all be like really deeply intentional about the culture and philosophical aspects of design systems, and for good reason, right? Because a lot of this stuff is new, and people have this innate kind of aversion towards completely changing the way they work. We get asked that all the time as a startup when we talk to VCs, right? Is like, hey, does this represent something that is a giant change to the way the organization builds? And the answer is like, well, yeah. But it has been. But one quick point, like it has been interesting. Like the market is also changing, right? Like people are starting to value this more and starting to get on board. And you have a lot of people that are in positions like you, Catherine, or you, Christoph, where you were at a place that had a design system, and now you're at another place. And like I assume that you would never work in a place that doesn't have a design system now. And so in that, like, zeitgeist revolution, culture revolution around systems and design systems, like are we feeling like this is getting easier? And like Christoph, this is mostly a question for you. You just went on a fairly extensive job search, wandering around various enterprise companies around the country trying to understand where you want to go work. Like, did you feel that it was different?
Well, I mean, obviously, I was only interested in like companies that already were looking for somebody that could lead their design system effort, right? But what is interesting, and the point that I wanted to make, was that the evolution that I see now is also the fact that certain people inside of organization worked in other places where they had a good functioning and mature design system, and so they also know what good looks like, which can help. Because, for example, like you can do a survey in your team, like asking people about like certain questions, but like I got, like answers about like, oh yeah, like in this previous company, we had this system in place and it was great. Like, yes, of course, like, talking about the contribution model, for example, and say, well, we had that rule that, like nothing was to be created if it was not part of the design system from the start, and, like you have somebody that gives a testimony that goes in your side from a previous company, like this didn't exist before. So I feel like, to answer your previous question, I feel in certain instances that helps, and that's getting a little bit easier because people understand the value that they had before, or they know, again, like how it was helping them down the line, and so they're more ready to make that effort, and they can tell about a different success story, basically, and saying, yeah, we put that in place. Yes, it was a little bit hard at the beginning, but we got so much value out of it, and that's always better when it's not you as the design lead, the design system lead, that is actually, like voicing this kind of opinion. You're like, okay, so that's, like, that person has no neck in the game. So, if they say that as an IC, maybe there's like a different ring to it than if I'm seeing it. So that's one thing.
Jenny, when you're hiring people, do you find people that are like stoked to work on design systems? Like, I think this is also really interesting, right? Like the talent pool, in my opinion, is turning over. I think that there's a tipping point that's probably not too far in the future that says that most people are going to seek out teams that have systems. Are you finding that to be a pretty common thing in like the folks you talk to in hiring?
I think my thinking about this changed. So when we were expanding the team after we got investment, one of the things we were thinking is that we really need to hire experts that have already previous systems experience, because at our scale, we didn't really have time for people to spend like a year to onboard to what systems are. So those kind of like, I think roles are more the entering, like more the junior, senior roles that were more open to like, they might have had a little bit, like maybe they've collaborated with the systems team but weren't on a systems team, so they understand what systems are. But then for like the senior leadership and everything, we're just like, we really need people that can hit the ground running. So we need to find experts in their field already. So that's the kind of people we've been looking for. We're looking for a PM right now, by the way. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. One question that I had for you, Jenny, is that obviously you're a design architect and you were mentioning that scale. So like, how is it for, first of all, like as a design architect to be, well, really like applying system thinking at that scale? Like, what does it mean for you? Like I'm just curious that, again, like in your context at that scale, like how do you do it personally, in your role? What are the things that you're thinking?
So systems thinking, like what is it to you guys, right? Like for me, it's like a way of working and methodology and thinking. So it's like after you kind of master design thinking, you kind of elevate it with systems thinking, because like you kind of zoom out to see the bigger problem of what you were originally looking at. So I totally applied systems thinking right now. When I came back from being on mat leave, I was gone for about 9-10 months, and I came back and I had to re-onboard into this huge complex space because everything changed, right? So what you do is really kind of like take a step back, look at everything, and I just started mapping everything out, mapping the stakeholders, mapping the common lines, mapping all the different initiatives going on, how they connect and everything. And like in my role, it's kind of like I am not only kind of like not overseeing too deeply what's going on the team, because they already have a vision strategy they're kind of following, so they can execute. I trust them. They can make it come to life. My job is kind of now like I need to look across the business, across the org, and connect the dots with what's happening and like what's circulating. And it's very complex because there's so many initiatives happening at the same time. So, I have to like be like, oh, okay, we're doing this and they're doing this. So I need to connect these two people together so they can work on a better solution together because they're both doing the same thing. But that's kind of how I do it. And, I spent about almost 2 months meeting, listening tour with all some of the same people, some new people, just seeing what happened in the past 10 months. And then right now I'm kind of in that research mode where I'm kind of like looking out to the industry, talking to you guys, talking to other peers, what's happening, kind of re-onboarding to systems world. And then I'm synthesizing kind of like what our next steps are, because one, we have moved towards other horizons. So what's next? Two, there's other things that are bigger than our team coming that we need to support. So I'm kind of like looking, what can we do there? So those are called like leverage points in systems thinking. It's like, what are the biggest points of what we can do to like make the most impact? And the only way I can do that right now is connecting with the other architects in the company. There's about 15 of us, I think. And we do have like a monthly meeting that we do meet with each other to share back on stuff. And I'm also working closely with a group of them right now on a big effort as well. So it's kind of nice to do that. So yeah.
Thanks. That's super interesting. I was wondering, like, so then how your role articulates with, I'm guessing, like there's an organization strategy and, like product teams have their own vision of what they're doing. And so I almost feel like, like they're going deep in one direction when you're actually like transversal across all those things. So I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, like this is not
So
easy.
yeah. So I have to understand what all the other product visions are. So I have to connect with all the other product team. Often they're head of designs and there are other principal designers, lead designers, and then we can't just like understand it lightly. You have to kind of understand it at the conceptual model level. So they have conceptual models that they're pushing towards for their products as well. So it's like, if they're pushing towards that, how do we connect the dots in other places to really make everything cohesive? Because everything's all over the place right now. Yeah, it's not easy. It's very overwhelming, and if you don't just take it one bit at a time, it is that I used to talk about hyper objects a lot. It's just like very, very overwhelming. There's no way you can solve it unless you just chip at it one day at a time.
Cool. It feels like 3D chess, when you have like everything is in relation with everything, and it's actually
everything's interconnected, right? That's also systems thinking, just like synthesis of the bigger thing. And when you look at everything, something will emerge. That's called emergence? Yeah.
Very cool.
I've missed you, Jenny. It's good to have you back.
Am I speaking in a different language?
No, I love it. It's great. Every time I talk to you, I learn something. It's wonderful.
That's great. Well, we're almost at time, and I know we have a few housekeeping topics to address. So maybe we're gonna switch gear a little bit. But Chris, I think you have a special and a personal announcement there.
Yeah. I mean, so Design Systems Podcast, we've opened up applications for 2024. Last time we got like 150 respondents to this, and so the images got cropped weird there. But anyway, regardless, if you want to apply to be on the podcast, we love getting folks from the community. It's way better than all of the PR firms that reach out and be like, hey, I want to push this person onto your podcast. So please apply. Love getting first timers, new people, experienced people, all types. So jump in there.
Cool. Next one, there's a cool front-end conference happening in Florida. I don't know if you have more context on that, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not any way affiliated with this, but this looked really interesting to me. I know Gina is here and she's speaking at this, but this came up on my radar. Seeing folks like Ben on here and Gina and a few others. Like, there's definitely, while not a design systems conference, some lean there. It's still fairly rare to see these events, and I think they're really important. So this one seems cool. Unfortunately, I'm not around, but I think that if you are around, this one looks like it'd be worth it.
Okay. This one has Chris Stroll's seal of approval. Got it.
Yeah, I mean, if that counts for anything, like, let me just put a stamp on this one.
Nice. Well, one thing that you are closer to is you actually have a meetup coming up in Seattle.
Yeah, way back in Field Guide episode 3 or 4, I started talking about trying to put together some more local events. We have our first organized meetup that's doing some local work here. This is going to be Fang at Costco has put together this event along with a few other folks in the community up in Seattle, February 29th. I'm planning on being there. I'm really excited to see these things start to kick off. We have a couple more that are in the works right now. But if you're in the Seattle area or feel like coming to Seattle to hang out, this is a great way to spend a couple hours on a midweek afternoon or evening.
Cool. Thanks. Well, I think this is it.
One other one, if you don't mind. The Design Systems Leadership Summit in San Francisco is coming April 18th. We're going to be at the SVB Experience Center on Market Street. Would love to have you all apply and come. It's a super cool event. We've done these in predominantly New York. We've always been completely sold out for them, which is why we have to take applications. But please jump in, apply, come. It's a great way to network with your peers, talk about the strategic value of design systems. It does tend to be a lot more focused on like the management and strategy for design systems, and a little less of like a how-to practitioner. But it's a great way to meet other people that are building, managing, creating, doing interesting stuff with design systems in your area.
Cool. Thanks. Okay, well, we're basically at the hour, so this is it for this month. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jenny, especially. I wish we had like 3 more hours to hear about stories at Atlassian. But thank you very much for coming with us today. And
Yeah, no
it's a
worries.
treat. Thanks.
Good to see you guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, all.
Thanks, Al.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.